Captain, there are aspects of this operation that required careful compartmentalization for security reasons. Some information was withheld to protect both the mission and the personnel involved. You'll receive a complete briefing once we reach the launch facility. The answer was professionally delivered but emotionally hollow, the kind of response that revealed nothing while appearing to provide information. Nya recognized the technique from her own training in operational security, but experiencing it from the receiving end felt uncomfortably manipulative. She decided to try a different approach, focusing on practical considerations rather than seeking explanations for the inexplicable. What can you tell me about the alternate launch facility? I'll need to understand the available resources and support capabilities. Her pilot training had taught her to focus on mission-critical information, regardless of personal feelings about the larger situation. Santos consulted a tablet mounted in the SUV's center console, scrolling through what appeared to be facility specifications and operational parameters. The launch facility is a specialized installation designed for discretionary operations requiring enhanced security and communication capabilities. You'll have access to full maintenance support, advanced mission planning systems, and real-time intelligence updates throughout the operation. As they drove deeper into the desert, Nya noticed that they were following roads that didn't appear on any maps she remembered studying. The terrain grew increasingly barren, with rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation creating a landscape that seemed designed to discourage casual exploration. Occasionally, she spotted what appeared to be communication antennas or sensor equipment disguised as natural rock formations, suggesting that they were entering a carefully monitored area. The launch facility materialized out of the desert landscape like a mirage becoming reality. From a distance, it appeared to be nothing more than a collection of industrial buildings and storage tanks, the kind of installation that might house oil drilling equipment or mining operations. As they approached the security perimeter, however, Nya began to notice details that suggested a far more sophisticated purpose. Hardened aircraft hangars built into natural rock formations, communication towers that stretched toward the star-filled sky, and defensive positions that commanded comprehensive views of the surrounding territory. Security checkpoints were staffed by personnel whose equipment and bearing suggested special operations background rather than conventional military police. They examined Santos's credentials with professional thoroughness, while conducting electronic sweeps of the vehicle that were far more comprehensive than standard base security procedures. Nya found herself being photographed and fingerprinted again, despite having undergone identical procedures at Forward Operating Base Kestrel just hours earlier. "Captain Rashidi, welcome to Facility 7, said the senior security officer as he returned her identification documents. "You're the medical bay of Forward Operating Base Kestrel," fell into an uncomfortable silence as Captain Nya Viper, Rashidi's voice echoed off the concrete walls. She had been methodically checking expiration dates on medical supplies, her flight suit sleeves rolled up, revealing the faded burn scars that traced her left forearm like abstract art. The other pilots gathered around the coffee station, their conversations reduced to whispers and sideways glances. Someone had mentioned her name in connection with the mysterious F-35 Lightning II that had been sitting dormant in Hangar 7 for 3 months. The jet that no one could start. The jet that had become the base's most expensive paperweight. "Rashidi," came the gravelly voice of Colonel Marcus Thorne as he stepped into the medical bay. His weathered face carried the weight of 30 years in combat aviation, and his gray eyes held secrets that classified briefings couldn't contain. "Leave the bandages. We need to talk." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his angular features as he waited for her response. Nya carefully placed the medical kit back on the metal shelf, her movements precise and unhurried despite the tension, crackling in the air like static electricity before a thunderstorm. The walk to Hangar 7 felt longer than usual, their footsteps echoing through the maze of concrete corridors that connected the base's various facilities. The hangar door stood partially open, revealing the sleek silhouette of the Lightning II bathed in afternoon sunlight streaming through high windows. The jet's angular surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an almost ethereal presence that commanded respect even in its dormant state. Ground crews had tried everything: diagnostic computers, manual overrides, even complete electrical system replacements. Nothing worked. 3 months, Thorne said, his voice barely above a whisper as they approached the aircraft. 96 days of our best technicians, Air Force specialists, even contractors from Lockheed Martin. This bird won't respond to anyone. He paused, studying Nya's expression as she gazed up at the fighter's canopy. The afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her dark eyes, revealing an intensity that few people ever bothered to notice. Except maybe you. Nya's fingers unconsciously traced the scars on her forearm, a nervous habit she'd developed after the incident that had grounded her from combat missions 2 years ago. The scars told a story she rarely shared, of emergency landings and burning cockpits, of split-second decisions that had saved lives but cost her everything she'd worked for. Now she spent her days managing supply inventories and conducting routine medical checks, relegated to the periphery of an organization that had once celebrated her as their youngest squadron leader. "Sir, with respect, I haven't flown combat in." "I know exactly how long it's been, Captain. What I want to know is why this particular aircraft seems to be waiting for something, or someone." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Nya stepped closer to the jet, her boots clicking against the polished concrete floor of the hangar. The F-35's presence was overwhelming up close, its stealth coating seeming to drink in the surrounding light. She had studied every technical manual, memorized every system, dreamed of flying this particular model since her academy days. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was finally standing next to one, only to be asked to play technician rather than pilot. "What makes you think I can do anything your specialists couldn't?" she asked, though her voice carried a note of curiosity that hadn't been there moments before. The aircraft towered above them, its nose pointed toward the open hangar doors as if yearning for the sky beyond. Something about its posture reminded her of a racehorse at the starting gate, coiled energy waiting for release. Thorne pulled a tablet from his jacket pocket, swiping through several screens of diagnostic data before handing it to her. "Because this jet has been through 3 different pilot assignments, and every time we tried to initialize the startup sequence, it failed at the same point: voice recognition authentication." He pointed to a specific line of code on the screen. "The system is looking for a specific pilot profile that doesn't exist in our database." Nya's heart skipped a beat as she read the error message displayed on the tablet's screen. The implications were staggering. Modern military aircraft didn't simply choose their pilots. They were programmed to accept authorized personnel based on biometric data, voice patterns, and security clearances. For this jet to be waiting for someone specific meant either a catastrophic programming error or something far more complex. "Permission to approach the cockpit, sir," she said, handing the tablet back to Thorne. Her voice carried a steady confidence that surprised even her. The colonel nodded, stepping back to give her space while maintaining visual contact. The ground crew had positioned a ladder beside the aircraft, its aluminum rungs gleaming under the hangar lights. Each step upward brought her closer to the cockpit, and with it, a growing sense of anticipation that she couldn't quite explain. The canopy was pristine, offering an unobstructed view of the cockpit's sophisticated interior. Multifunction displays lined the dashboard, their screens dark and lifeless. The pilot's seat was adjusted perfectly for someone of her height and build, an observation that sent a chill down her spine. She had never been in this particular aircraft before, yet everything seemed tailored to her specifications. The harness straps hung at precisely the right length, the rudder pedals positioned exactly where her feet would naturally rest. "Try the voice command," Thorne called from below, his voice echoing off the hangar walls. "Standard startup sequence." Nya placed her hand on the canopy frame and leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and authoritative as she spoke directly toward the aircraft's voice recognition sensors. "Lightning 779er, voice authentication for startup sequence. Captain Nya Rashidi, call sign Viper, authorization code Delta 47 Alpha 9er." For a moment, Nothing happened. The hangar remained silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning units and the subtle creaking of metal as the building settled in the afternoon heat. Then, almost imperceptibly, a series of indicator lights began to flicker to life inside the cockpit. The primary displays illuminated with diagnostic information, and the gentle whir of internal systems coming online filled the air. "Son of a bitch," Thorne whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing symphony of electronic activation. The F-35 systems continued their startup sequence, each component responding as if awakening from a long sleep. The heads-up display flickered to life, projecting a welcome message that made Nya's breath catch in her throat. On the main screen in crisp white letters against a blue background appeared the words, "Welcome back, Viper. Systems online. Awaiting flight authorization." The message hung in the air like a ghost from her past, stirring memories she had carefully buried beneath layers of medical inventory reports and routine administrative duties. Nya descended the ladder slowly, her legs feeling unsteady despite years of maintaining peak physical condition. The aircraft systems continued their diagnostic sequence, filling the hangar with the subtle sounds of a war machine preparing for action. "How is this possible?" she asked, though the question was directed more toward the universe than toward Colonel Thorne. The F-35 had never been her assigned aircraft, yet it recognized her voice authentication codes, codes that should have been deactivated after her grounding. The military didn't leave security clearances active for personnel who weren't actively flying combat missions. Thorne's expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching concern. He pulled out his secure communication device and began typing rapidly, likely requesting clarification from higher command levels. "Captain, I need you to think carefully. Have you ever worked with this specific aircraft before? Any previous assignments, test flights, simulation training?" Nya shook her head, but even as she did, fragments of memory began surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. Late nights in simulation centers, classified briefings she wasn't supposed to remember, conversations with engineers who spoke in hushed tones about experimental aircraft modifications. The puzzle pieces didn't form a complete picture, but they suggested something far more complex than a simple equipment malfunction. "Sir, I need to access my personnel file," she said, her voice steady despite the growing certainty that nothing about this situation was coincidental. "Full records, including classified assignments and medical evaluations from the past 3 years." The colonel's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, searching for signs of deception or confusion. What he found instead was the same focused intensity that had made her one of the youngest pilots ever promoted to squadron leadership. "That might take some time to arrange, Captain. In the meantime, I need to know if you're willing to sit in that cockpit and see what happens when you attempt a full system initialization. The request hung between them like a challenge, loaded with implications that neither fully understood. Nya looked back at the F-35, its systems still humming with electronic life, waiting for her next command. The aircraft seemed almost patient, like a faithful dog that had been waiting for its owner to return from a long journey. If I do this, I want your word that whatever we discover stays between us until we understand what's really happening, she said, meeting Thorne's gaze directly. I have too many questions and not enough answers to trust this to committee decision-making. Thorne considered her request for a long moment, weighing the potential consequences of keeping classified information from his superiors against the obvious reality that standard protocols had already failed spectacularly. The F-35 represented millions of dollars in taxpayer investment, and its continued dormancy was becoming a significant operational liability. You have my word, Captain, but if this goes sideways, we both answer for it. Nyan nodded and climbed back up the ladder, this time with purpose rather than curiosity driving her movements. She settled into the pilot's seat and immediately felt the rightness of the position, as if the cockpit had been molded specifically for her body dimensions. The seat adjustments were perfect. The control surfaces fell naturally under her hands, and the heads-up display aligned precisely with her line of sight. Lightning 779er requesting full system initialization. She spoke clearly into the cockpit's communication system. Pilot authentication confirmed, standing by for flight-ready status. The response was immediate and comprehensive. Every screen in the cockpit blazed to life simultaneously, displaying flight parameters, weapons system status, navigation coordinates, and communication frequencies. The aircraft's sophisticated computer began running through its pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, each system reporting green across all parameters. The engines remained offline, but every other component seemed eager to demonstrate its readiness. More troubling than the aircraft's responsiveness was the growing realization that she knew exactly how to operate every system without referring to technical manuals or refresher training. Her hands moved across the control panels with practiced familiarity, adjusting display settings and checking system parameters, as if she had been flying this particular aircraft for years rather than sitting in it for the first time. "Colonel," she called down from the cockpit, her voice carrying a note of unease that hadn't been there before. "I'm getting navigation coordinates that I don't recognize, but somehow they feel familiar. Grid reference 7749 north, 4216 east. Does that mean anything to you?" Thorne consulted his tablet, cross-referencing the coordinates with known military installations and operational areas. His face grew pale as the database returned its results. "Captain, Those coordinates place you approximately 200 miles inside Syrian airspace, in a region that's been designated off-limits to all Western military aircraft for the past 18 months. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If the aircraft was programmed with specific mission coordinates, it suggested that Nya had been intended for a particular operation, one that neither of them had any official knowledge of. The mysterious grounding, the medical evaluations, the reassignment to inventory management, everything began to take on a more sinister context. "Shut it down," Thorne ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "Right now, Captain. Power down all systems and get out of that cockpit." But as Nya reached for the shutdown controls, the aircraft's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged from the speakers was electronically distorted but unmistakably authoritative, carrying the weight of classified operations and need-to-know clearances. "Viper, this is oversight. Authentication confirmed. You are cleared for mission briefing Alpha 77. Stand by for encrypted data transmission." Nya's blood ran cold as encrypted files began downloading to the aircraft's mission computer. The screens filled with classified intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and operational parameters for what appeared to be a deep reconnaissance mission into hostile territory. The level of detail was staggering. Enemy radar positions, communication frequencies, extraction coordinates, and contingency plans that had clearly been months in development. "Negative oversight," she responded, her training taking over despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I am not currently assigned to active duty status. Request clarification of mission authorization and command structure." The response came after a brief pause, during which Nya could hear background chatter that suggested the transmission was originating from a sophisticated command center rather than a routine radio operator. "Viper, your status was temporarily modified for operational security. You have been recalled to active duty effective immediately. Mission window opens in 72 hours." Thorne was frantically trying to contact his superiors through his secure communication device, but the hangar's signal-dampening systems seemed to be interfering with his attempt. His frustrated expressions and repeated redial attempts suggested that someone had deliberately isolated them from outside communication. "Oversight, I'm going to need verification of authorization from my commanding officer before I acknowledge any mission parameters," Nya said, buying time while her mind raced through the implications of what was happening. The professional part of her brain was already analyzing the mission data, calculating flight times and fuel requirements, while the rational part screamed warnings about unauthorized operations and potential courts-martial. "Viper, your commanding officer is currently operating under the same classified protocols. Colonel Thorne has received his briefing packet and is authorized to provide local support for your mission preparation. Check your personal communication device for confirmation codes. Almost involuntarily, Nya reached for her phone and found a series of text messages that hadn't been there an hour earlier. The confirmation codes matched official military protocols she had memorized during her initial security training, but the implications of receiving them through civilian communication channels raised immediate red flags about operational security. She showed the messages to Thorne, who studied them with growing concern. His expertise in military communications protocols was evident in the way he scrutinized each code sequence, cross-referencing them with established authentication procedures. After several minutes of analysis, he looked up at her with an expression that mixed professional obligation with personal unease. "These are legitimate," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the continued hum of the F-35's active systems. "But the authorization level is so far above my clearance that I shouldn't even be looking at them. Captain, someone with significant power and influence wants you in that cockpit for reasons that apparently extend far beyond anything in your official service record." The weight of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Nya remained in the pilot's seat, surrounded by mission data for an operation she had no memory of volunteering for, while Thorne stood on the hangar floor looking like a man who had stumbled into a conspiracy far larger than his pay grade could handle. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the hangar windows seemed suddenly ominous, casting long shadows that transformed familiar surroundings into something threatening and unknown. Oversight requesting 24-hour delay for mission preparation and personnel briefing, Nya transmitted, her pilot training asserting itself despite the unusual circumstances. Standard protocols demanded adequate preparation time for any complex operation, regardless of its classification level. Negative, Viper. Mission parameters are time-sensitive. You have 18 hours to complete preparation and reach departure coordinates. Transportation to alternate launch facility will be provided at 2000 hours today. The mention of an alternate launch facility sent another chill through the hangar. Forward Operating Base Kestrel was equipped with everything necessary to support F-35 operations, including maintenance facilities, fuel systems, and communication networks. Moving the operation to a different location suggested either security concerns or the need for capabilities that weren't available at their current base. Thorne finally managed to establish communication with Base Command, speaking in hushed tones while keeping one eye on Nya and the active aircraft. His side of the conversation consisted mainly of acknowledgments and requests for clarification, suggesting that he was receiving information rather than providing it. When he ended the call, his expression had shifted from concern to something approaching resignation. "Captain, I've been ordered to provide you with full logistical support and to treat this as a priority operation. Your medical clearance has been reactivated, your flight status has been restored, and I've been instructed not to ask questions about mission specifics." He paused, studying her face for any sign of recognition or understanding. The orders come from the Pentagon, and they carry the kind of signatures that make colonels very nervous about their careers. Nya began the shutdown sequence for the F-35 systems, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as her mind struggled to process the rapid transformation of her circumstances. 18 hours ago, she had been checking expiration dates on medical supplies and avoiding the pitying glances of her former squadron mates. Now, she was apparently critical personnel for a classified operation that had been planned without her knowledge or consent. "Sir, I need you to understand that I remember fragments of things that shouldn't be possible," she said as the aircraft systems powered down around her. "Technical specifications I never studied, procedural knowledge I never received training for, and operational parameters that feel familiar despite being completely foreign. Either I'm experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown, or someone has been modifying my memory." The possibility of memory modification hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Both knew that such techniques existed within the intelligence community, though their use on military personnel was supposedly restricted to extreme circumstances involving national security. The ethical implications were staggering, but the practical considerations were even more disturbing. Thorne helped her down from the cockpit, his movements careful and deliberate as if he were handling unstable ordnance. "Captain, if what you're suggesting is true, then we're dealing with an operation that exists outside normal military command structures. The kind of black operations that don't officially exist and leave no paper trails." As they walked away from the now dormant aircraft, Nya felt a strange sense of loss, as if she were leaving behind something important that she might never see again. The F-35 sat silently in the afternoon light, its systems powered down but somehow still radiating potential energy. She couldn't shake the feeling that the aircraft was more than just a machine to her, that it represented a connection to a part of herself that had been carefully hidden away. 18 hours, she murmured, more to herself than to Thorne. 18 hours to prepare for a mission I don't remember volunteering for, in an aircraft that apparently knows me better than I know myself. The hangar fell silent except for the distant sounds of base operations continuing their normal routines. Other pilots were probably preparing for standard training flights, conducting equipment inspections, or attending briefings for conventional missions. Meanwhile, she was walking toward what felt like the edge of a cliff, beyond which lay either the most important mission of her career or the complete destruction of everything she thought she knew about her own life. "Colonel, I need one favor," she said as they reached the hangar entrance. "If I don't come back from wherever this is taking me, I want you to investigate what really happened during my grounding 2 years ago. Not the official report, but the real reason I was pulled from combat operations." Thorne's expression grew somber as he considered her request. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac beyond the hangar, and the normal sounds of base operations seemed muted and distant. "Captain, you have my word, but I have a feeling you're going to come back with more answers than questions." The next several hours passed in a blur of preparation activities that felt both routine and surreal. Nya underwent rapid medical evaluations that cleared her for immediate flight duty, retrieved specialized equipment from supply depots she hadn't accessed in years, and reviewed mission parameters that seemed to slot into her memory like missing puzzle pieces. Each step of the process felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, as if she were following a script she had rehearsed but couldn't quite remember learning. At 1900 hours, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a black SUV with government plates arrived at the base's main entrance. The driver presented credentials that had Thorne's security detail stepping aside without question, their usual thorough inspection procedures apparently waived for this particular vehicle. Nya watched from her quarters window as the SUV navigated the base's security checkpoints with an efficiency that suggested intimate familiarity with the facility's protocols. The knock on her door came precisely at 1930, delivered by a woman in civilian clothes whose bearing screamed military intelligence, despite her attempts to appear non-threatening. She introduced herself simply as Agent Santos and explained that they had a 40-minute drive to reach the alternate launch facility where final mission preparations would be completed. "Captain Rashidi, I want you to know that what you're about to undertake is crucial to ongoing national security operations," Santos said as they walked toward the waiting vehicle. "The mission parameters may seem unusual, but every detail has been carefully planned by people who understand the larger strategic picture." Nya settled into the SUV's passenger seat, noting the sophisticated communication equipment and computer terminals that transformed the vehicle into a mobile command center. As they drove away from forward operating Base Kestrel, she watched the familiar buildings and runways disappear in the side mirror, wondering if she would ever see them again under normal circumstances. "Agent Santos, can you tell me why I don't remember being briefed for this mission?" she asked as they navigated through the desert landscape surrounding the base. The evening light painted the terrain in shades of gold and amber, creating a beauty that seemed incongruous with the weight of their conversation. "Captain, There are aspects of this operation that required careful compartmentalization for security reasons. Some information was withheld to protect both the mission and the personnel involved. You'll receive a complete briefing once we reach the launch facility.